I love flea markets, thrift stores. I am one of those people where not only do I have fun when I like you, when I find this thing that is rare that I only would have found it if I was here at this moment. That's actually how I found an old original hardback of the Xenogenesis series. I found a signed Clive Barker book. I'm a huge Clive Barker fan. And so you only find these gems when you go to these places. But a lot of the times, like you said, it has changed. It has become more commercialized. And a lot of times when I'm going in and hunting, people have kind of already scraped off the shelves and taken what's popular to do resell and things like that. So for me, it is harder to find those gems, but I still love to go out and go to flea markets and shop for those things. Now, in terms of how I kind of took Natalia Stravinsky from the Coveted series and kind of graduated to the Flea Market Magic series was, first of all, the readers kept kind of poking me like, hey, is there anything else from Nat? We still love Natalia. But also for me, Natalia would not stop talking. She was one of those characters where sliding into her head is like putting on a warm coat. It's really easy for me to fall into her head. I have been writing for her for over 10 years now. And so, kind of continuing her series, moving forward, kind of gave me an opportunity to expand the world more, kind of tap into the things that she's still dealing with in terms of her mental illness and her journey toward just not exactly normal because we're never going to be normal, but trying to continue to work toward normal. And so one of those things that I wanted to tap into was just kind of like still having fun, still showing her adventures, and of course still showing how much I love I love flea markets, that kind of thing. In each particular book, I knew that I wanted to deal with. So before, Natalia was always working at the Bend of the River flea market called the Bends in South Toms River. And so I kind of wanted to grow the world more and actually show a lot of these supernatural creatures owning their own stores. So whether it's a grocery store or a bakery, a lot of the times in my world, the humans don't know about the supernatural world. And so to kind of grow that world, I had supernatural creatures, whether it's a centaur or some other things, they actually would own their own supernatural store everywhere in the world. And so each book kind of came into play with Natalia actually ending up in a situation to where to save someone else or to help her pack, she ends up working at another establishment that's owned by another supernatural creature. So what happens in Deceptive uh, Dime Store Demons is Natalia actually ends up working for some demons that I believe own a ceramic mart. And so what comes into play there is the dynamics of her trying to save others, help out other people's, whilst hers trying to still deal with her circumstances with this new store owner and things going on. So that's kind of like how the series kept going, was how Natalia ended up at a new establishment having to deal with new problems. Oh, so the titles themselves were pretty much one of those things where early on, so before with the Coveted series, it wasn't exactly planned. But for this series, I actually did want to plan out like a full arc. So I did plan ahead at least 5 books. And so what ended up happening was I had the major arc of her having to deal with a goddess and some of the issues that arose from her, this big fight with this goddess. And so I kind of planned out and I gave myself like 10 or so titles. And I said to myself, okay, you're not married to any of these titles, but you can use them if you have a particular creature that you want to deal with at that particular time in this big arc. So that's how we got with trolls, then demons, then dragons, and it all came about with basically just a big list of titles. And then also, I came up with a big list of store names that could be associated with supernatural creatures. So that was actually a lot of fun. Diana, she who always walks the path. So that was the name that I initially gave to the goddess. Actually, that's like Artemis, Diana. And so initially, when I had written that book, I didn't want to give away who the goddess was. So sorry, spoilers. But initially, I didn't want to give away who that particular antagonist was. She was just kind of like this creature out there who, of course, Diana, she's the goddess of the hunt. And so in this series, she's actually still hunting and she is just traveling all over the world hunting. So at that point, she was kind of hunting in Canada and she was referred to as she who always walks the path. So she is that hunter, duck season over here, unicorn season over there. And so I kind of had her traveling around, and that's how she became she who walks the path. And that adversely her walking the path, her doing her hunting expeditions actually positively affected supernatural creatures. So all of these businesses were kind of like groupies following her around and opening up their stores in places where she was nearby. And that adversely affect my heroine. And that's how the story unfolded to where she was kind of caught up in the snare of Diana, she who always walks the path. That's how that kind of turned out. The most important thing to me in coming up with the narrative of her interaction with Diana was I definitely wanted it to be to where Natalia is still just a werewolf. Even though she has all of these friends, wizards and such, she still is just this werewolf versus a goddess who has just so many of these powers that are beyond what Natalia can do. So it was very important for me to be like, no, this is not going to be a head to head battle. And actually, in the fourth book at the end, it was more about where Natalia needed a champion. She needed help to actually face Diana because with her current abilities, she could not face Diana at all. And so the arc of the stories was more about Natalia kind of dealing with the goddess and not necessarily going into this big fight confronting her because there was never going to be a fight between Natalia and the goddess because it just would have been, like Thanos snap and you're a goner. So it was more about the dynamics of Natalia working with her family, working with her friends to actually figure out the situation versus her tackling Diana head on. Ferocious flea market dragons. So for me, in terms of the five magical objects, it was more of thinking of, okay, in any situation where you own a thrift store or a pawn shop, you need stock. And so oftentimes, a lot of these folks, when they own these stores, they will go out to actually find stock themselves, drop shipping, other things. And so when I was crafting this supernatural world and looking at Seamus, I was like, okay, well, we have supernatural objects in his store. How is he going to get more stock? Well, in this case, since Natalia has also worked for in thrift stores, she's worked for Bill, her goblin boss, she is in the perfect position to actually be a buyer, to negotiate, to do these things. So he kind of barters, not going to give away. So in a previous book, she ends up having to do some things, like I said, to actually help out the pack and save others. And she ends up having to work for Seamus. So in this case, part of the barter of the deal with Seamus is she needs to get these five objects that he wants to acquire. But of course, since he's underhanded, he's actually putting her in danger to get these objects that he actually wants to sell in his store. So in order for her to end her contract with Seamus, she needs to retrieve these five objects as a buyer for him. So she doesn't have to buy these things for him with her money. She just needs to be the intermediary in these dangerous situations to actually get these things for Seamus. I definitely wanted to have some fun because when you think of, you know, the goddess of the hunt, you think of the hounds. She hunts with the hounds. So I was like, okay, well, let's take this to the next level. Um, could those hounds be hellhounds? Could those hounds potentially have supernatural abilities to where they help her in the hunt, depending on what her prey is? And so in this instance, not going to spoil it, but of course, earlier in the series, Natalia actually meets the goddess face to face, and then she's in a pickle. And so what ends up happening later is that the goddess actually wants Natalia back. And so what ends up happening is she sends out the hellhounds to hunt down Natalia. And of course, this being these great supernatural creatures, Natalia actually needs a champion. And that champion ends up being a dragon. So in this case, the entire final book is about not necessarily Natalia facing the goddess, but Natalia having to get help, of course, from family and friends, dealing with the fact that she's kind of grown within her pack. Of course, still dealing with the fact that she still needs emotional and mental support in her life. And running, of course, running away from the dragon, the hellhounds, getting help from her champion, and then finally coming, facing the adversity, and then coming out of the other side, not necessarily better, but in a position to where she's still moving on. She's that underdog that is still trying to improve and better herself, that kind of thing. The Fallen Fruit is basically a historical fiction fantasy about a family of free Blacks that had lived in the Charlottesville, Virginia area. And they actually have the curse of time travel. And so, as this story unfolds, it starts out with Cicely Bridge, who lives as a professor in the 1960s. And she inherits some acres of land in the Charlottesville, Virginia area, but in returning back to town, we learn that Cicely actually doesn't know about her past. She has didn't know about her parents and such. She inherits this land, and so she's actually prepared to just sell it off. But then in going to the family's farm and seeing their orchard, getting these clues, she kind of goes into the role of a genealogist. And instead of selling the land outright, she kind of falls into this black hole of research and kind of unfolds the Bridge family's curse. And as it unfolds and she learns more about the curse, we learn more about the other bridges through time, whether it's the 1980s. I mean, sorry about that, whether it's the 1920s, the early 1800s, or even the pre and post American Revolution. We kind of get these mysteries around the bridges. And as the story unfolds, it's the question of, can Cicely be free from the curse, or will fate continue to play out as is? I would say out of all of the characters, Cicely is the most one where I kind of connect to her, where she is this Black woman that has kind of grown up as this sci-fi nerd, where she just had this passion about reading science fiction, um, this passion about learning history and stories. And so in terms of falling into her head and seeing what it is like to be a woman who grew up enjoying sci-fi and then is kind of wrapped into this mystery of exploring her past, it was kind of like it drew parallels from my experience to where for me, I was one of those people that it wasn't until later in life in speaking with the late my uncle Toby, where I kind of learned about my own family's genealogy, where only before I knew about my grandparents. But I kind of fell down the black hole and kind of learned more about the circumstances of my family. Now, of course, there's no family curses or anything cool like that, but it was more of exploring my family's history, learning about the tea and all the tidbits, and it gave me an opportunity to really fall into Cicely's head and be like, what are the unknown stories? What are the mysteries for me to solve? So, in going to Cicely's journey, where she's exploring the family, finding out these dark secrets, it's also for me as a mother, kind of like falling into the head of someone where I could fall back in time. I could lose out on all of these things that I hold dear. And that was a pretty powerful of experience for me in exploring Cicely's current circumstances in the 60s, looking at my life today, and then looking at the aspects of time travel and what I could lose the way Cicely did.